And if you've never been to Alton Bay, this is what it may look like. This is probably from the Winter Carnival, a busy, busy place. The airport itself has been very busy. It does change year to year, and due to conditions, you can see some of the variations that probably do end up occurring. But beautiful, wonderful place to end up visiting in New Hampshire in the middle of winter. Great opportunity for all of us pilot types and even airplane geeks to get out and take a look at what is going on in the world of aviation. And every year, Paul and his crew do a terrific job in working on getting it set up. And, they've already been out there some. I happened to go by earlier this week. I think it was Tuesday. So I stopped and snapped this picture, and Paul and his crew have already outlined the parking ramp area and stuff in relation to it. And just like I normally do on the morning of this kind of now annual tradition webinar to help you with the safety, I ran over there quick this morning because I live right in the area. It is a warm morning. It is now raining. Earlier this morning, it was raining in about 35 degrees with a little bit of snow and sleet mixed in. At the higher elevations, we had a couple inches of snow, like right over by the nearby Gunstock ski area. But, there's some water collecting on it. And we've had a trend lately where the days have been warmer, above average, 5, 7 degrees above average. So we haven't had as much ice being built as fast as we would like to see. But, we're always hopeful. And each year is a little bit different too. And we'll talk about that. Last year was not a very good year, but this is just from this morning. Like I said, I walked out there. I checked the ice depth. Paul does it all the time, and it's on the Facebook, and you definitely want to go there and keep up to date. But just if you happen to be on here, we had about 7.5, 8 inches in that hole right there. And just so you have pictures from Bradley is the John and Dan. There's John and I actually flying together. And then, like we said, we have John Bell joining us too. So this is the entire New England FAAST team. We're here with you. We also, because Carol does and her team down in Concord do a lot of work in prepping and planning and doing what they can too to support Paul and Alton Bay Ice Runway, because it is something that's very unique in aviation and is terrific. She's joining us because she'll talk about the plan a lot with it. And, one thing we do have to hand to is, we're here doing this webinar, but it's a result of everybody doing a lot of work. RAF has supported it. Paul has a crew that gets out there and helps him move aircraft all the time. The local pilots that go there regularly support the local community. Some of the FBOs, like in Sanford and Rochester, and flying clubs have done events where they do fundraising support for the airport and everything like that. So, do recognize that this is a big, big community effort to make this available to you out there. We're going to talk about the risk and how to be safe there today, but the big, big part to this is something that's unique, and it does need to be promoted, and that's what we want to emphasize. Many of you are here for the Wings program. Couple housekeeping tips or things there. Wings credit will be uploaded in a few days. If you do miss this or you want to review it, we normally put a recording of this up on the Boston FAASTeam YouTube channel. I just took down last year's a day or two ago. This one we'll try to get up here this week with it. There are handouts that are available in relation to it. And if you haven't seen it, do take a look. We do a lot of different things safety oriented on the Boston FAASTeam YouTube channel. It's actually mostly work with the entire New England FAAST team here, but we're trying some things that are a little bit different. You'll have anything from recordings of full-blown webinars like what we're doing today that may be an hour or hour and a half long, down to short little 5-minute quick tip type things for you. And if you're not familiar with the Wings program, we would encourage you to do it. That's on FAASAFETY.GOV, and what we're always trying to do is to promote, educate, and improve aviation for you in general aviation. And in the winter here in New Hampshire, we all got to get out and have some fun as much as we possibly can. And for us airplane geeks, what better way than to go drool over some airplanes that may go in and out of Alton Bay? This makes my heart go pitty patter as I take a look at this. This would be one of my dreams to have that. But you get a big mix, a lot of different types of aircraft, a lot of different types of people from all over. Everything from your Bonanzas and Saratogas down to your Cessna 140s and Luscombs and R-22s and all of that go into the Alton Bay Airport. So we get to know you. We have right now coming up close to 300 of you online. We have a little bit over 400, as I said, registered. But we're just curious is whether you have flown into Alton Bay or if you plan to. So I'm going to launch a poll question. What I'd like you to do is answer it to the best of your abilities. So we'll launch that. John, you're familiar with this. I'll give.
Yep. And just so you'll know, you folks that are sitting out there all know that I can see the poll questions easier than Steve can because he's a presenter. So I'll just read this to you. I have flown to the Alton Bay Ice Runway. Here are your possible answers. Never and not plan to. Never, but thinking of experiencing this adventure. Once or twice, about 5 times, or more than 10 times over multiple years. So please go ahead, let us know what you think. We'll get an idea of what our audience is composed of.
Yeah, and this is always interesting. It's in my hometown, my backyard type of thing. Moved away for years, but I used to teach them many years ago in the late 80s and the 90s. I'd take students over there and do some landings in the middle of the week and stuff. But it was funny, years ago, this was probably around 1990, I had a student, before he finished up his private pilot certificate, moved to Houston, Texas. But he had already flown in and out of there with me. And he actually, the following winter, bought plane tickets and, had a video camera, with a big VHS cassette, brought it with him and bought a plane ticket just to come back and fly with me and get video of the runway and him flying into and out of the runway, because nobody down in the Houston, Texas area believed him that actually airplanes took off and landed on the ice, or that, crazy people in New England would think of building an ice runway and enjoy it. So, all right, we got the time there. I'm going to close this and now share it. And we got a good mix by the looks of it, John.
Yeah, it sure does. It looks like the #1 answer at 59% is never, but thinking of experiencing this adventure. And that's great because we really want you on board this webinar. And so we're so happy you're here. The #2 at 22% is once or twice. And then the others are in the single numbers, about 5 times, more than 10 times, or no, never, nor do I plan to. Those are in the single numbers.
Yeah. And the whole purpose of this webinar, we are the FAA safety team, is to highlight to you the hazards you may encounter and the risks that may be involved into going someplace unique like this, and how to mitigate those risks, how to do it safely. And this is actually, I hope, a terrific webinar for every single person that answered at any level on this. If you never plan on going there or have the opportunity, this will hopefully help you understand about some winter flying better. If you're the type, like most people are, you're thinking of going there, we really, really want you to have reviewed this and take heed to some of the advice that we give you. And if you even fly in and out of there regularly, it's a good refresher and reminder, because I try to do it as much as I possibly can, but it seems to be about a once every other year thing for me over many years. And, every time I go, I learn something new. And every year we're adding and discussing and changing things to this webinar. And, it does change, as I was talking about. Last year, sadly, we really never had the airport open. The best it ever looked like was something similar to this, where the airport the runway itself never did get open, plowed, or anything like that. We just had too thin of ice to support the plow trucks and um, everything there. You know, last year when we did this webinar on January 11th, and at 7 in the morning, I ran out, took pictures of it, and this is what it looked like, the bandstand area and stuff. You know, we're getting some ice. It was looking promising, but the forecast that day, which it turned out to be, was for 60 degrees and warm, and I think it even got up to 70. And after the webinar, I went by again. I'm like, yeah, let me go double check, because it got really warm while we were doing the webinar, and so much was melting. You know, it just was puddles everywhere. And this is why it's important for you to keep up with the Alton Bay um, Facebook page that we'll talk about in a little bit. And even the year before, it was interesting. This I happened to go by on February 12th. It was a warm day, melting, nobody there, all of that. However, 3 weeks later, you know, it had gotten colder, reformed up, snow. Paul and his crew did a terrific job. You know, it was absolutely awesome. And my son and I went flying in and out of there a few times. You know, it's just terrific. If you don't know where it's at, this is where it's located. It's right off of Lake Winnipesaukee, which is the largest lake in New Hampshire. The airport itself, Alton Bay, right here, Bravo 18, is located tucked right down in this bay in the most southeastern portion of Lake Winnipesaukee. It's basically right about 10 nautical miles to the southeast of Laconia Airport. Do want to mention and point out to you other airports in the area, because this is one that you have to have the contingency plan of being ready to go somewhere else, or if you need services like fuel, where do you get them? Nearby airports, just to point out, Moultonborough, this is an older chart, but this is now a private airport, so not necessarily open to the public. That's still true, correct, Carol?
Yeah, it's still true. We are waiting for the publication to come through because the new owners have applied for it to become a public use airport again.
Oh, excellent, excellent. That's good to know.
So
I had
just
not.
waiting for the publication.
Excellent. I had not checked on it since late in the summer or the fall. That's great news. Laconia Airport is probably one of the principal ones where a lot of people do end up going for fuel or staging or anything like that. Or Concord is nearby. Rochester Skyhaven is nearby. Sanford is another popular one because of the restaurant there. That if people are not able to get into Alton Bay, or if they're going to the area and want to fly over it but not land at Alton Bay. And the same thing with Leamington Harmon up in the Maine area. And, you know, I'll ask you to maybe talk about this a little bit, but certificates are available, but there is a change in the process in getting certificates to say that you landed at Alton Bay. Also, there have been other things available. Some of them may be available at a cost in the area. If you check with a ground crew, they can point you in the right direction. But buttons and hats, I know I got buttons from years ago. And in recent years, they've been giving out kind of, what do they call them? The ice chips, but they're like specialized poker chips to show that you had flown in there. And I think because of COVID, we're not planning on seeing those this year. That's correct, Carol?
That's right. Because Alton Bay Ice Runway is actually owned by the state of New Hampshire, and Governor Sununu, he's our boss. We are following to the letter everything that he has been posting on his emergency orders as far as gatherings of people and those kinds of things. So to try to discourage gatherings of people, we're not going to be handing out certificates and having people gather around a vehicle or something like that to try to get your certificate this year. Just go on Facebook page or email the state. The contact information is there. And we are happy to give you a certificate. We'll send it to you in the mail or by email. Paul and his wife, Paul LaRochelle, our airport manager, and his wife, they do periodically have, I'm going to call them tchotchkes. Could be hats, could be sweatshirts, could be t-shirts, whatever they might be. from time to time that have the Alton Bay logo on it. So just reach out to Paul. He has an answering machine. I think Steve is going to have that on a different slide here coming up. And yes, excuse me, we have had the ice chips in the past commemorating landings on the Alton Bay ice runway. This year we chose not to do that, just to kind of keep the people moving through the area instead of stopping and gathering in groups of 10 or more. Hopefully we can do this again in the future, though.
Yeah.
Once COVID's over.
Yeah, again, classically, things are a little bit different right now. We're all looking forward to the future and, you know, the impact of vaccines and that sort of thing. Carol, this unique airport, not very many people end up flying in here. You know, some people do the special trip from Houston, as I mentioned, or whatever. I actually, it's been a while since I've heard, approximately on a year when it's up and active, how many operations do we end up seeing a total year at, say, average at Alton Bay?
In a 6-week season, which it would be a really good season for us at Alton Bay, we might be close to, and Paul, if you're on as a participant, you may want to correct me and we'll correct everybody, but I think we're close to the 500 operations mark, which ends up making us one of the busiest airports in New Hampshire for those 6 weeks.
You know, in the middle of February, right?
Who knew?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because I've heard numbers as high as like 1,100, 1,400, but I did think those were probably on the years that were a bit better and had a bit more with it. It's not used by a whole lot of pilots. It is something that is unique. And, you know, we do talk about this. It's a great opportunity, but you have to do your due diligence, do your planning, do your practice and all of that. And what we want to do is we want you to avoid what we call the buts. You know, my insurance agent is not happy with me, you know, but I had to walk home, you know, but, oh, it's not a retractable, but it is now, you know. But the little wheel is supposed to be on the back end, not the front end, you know, on this, you know, but we don't want to make your aircraft a monument for the hazards that are involved with operating there. And we do this webinar because we have found that it's not just local pilots, you know, from the New Hampshire area that end up having challenges and, you know, events. Usually, thankfully, knock on wood, rarely do we have something that truly qualifies as an accident. Most things that do end up happening are just known as incidents in the eyes of the FAA. But, you know, there is risk involved with it, and you need to mitigate that risk to improve your safety. You know, and this is an old list and many more. But to prepare for this, you have to start at home. And you want to talk about that a little bit, John?
Sure, Steve. Yeah, you know, when I first came to this business, when I first started as an inspector, I really had a naive thought that there was a golden ring out there someplace to preventing accidents. And of course, we all know better. There is no one particular thing that you can do to prevent accidents, but there are a couple that you can group together that, you know, in my experience, come about as close as possible to keeping yourself from bending an airplane or hurting somebody. And those two things are pre-flight planning and personal minimums. And I'll talk a little bit about pre-flight planning, because when we talk about pre-flight, we talk about, we think of pre-flight, or we use the term synonymously with the walk-around inspection. You know, I'm going to go out and pre-flight the airplane. But that's only part of it. The walk-around is part of the entire pre-flight, you know, task, but it is not the only thing that you do during pre-flight. So planning, right, Steve brings up the slide right here, pre-flight action. You know, each pilot in command shall, before beginning the flight, become familiar with all available information concerning this flight and what that information must include. And so when you think about flying into the ice runway at Alton Bay, we have the usual things that we do in pre-flight planning. We want to check the weather. We want to know what the field conditions are. We want to make sure that we're ready for the flight, that we are, you know, well rested, that we have, you know, have had something to eat that day when we get up, and not just the coffee and donuts, that that the aircraft is ready for the flight, that the aircraft is capable of doing it. But we also want to be checking, you know, the pilot operating handbook. Now, we are probably not going to find in any of our pilot operating handbooks, you know, any type of instructions on how to operate in and out of an ice runway. But what we will find is we will find information about how to do short and soft field, how to conduct short and soft field takeoffs and landings, and those may be very applicable for what we're about to do. You know, just taking the time to think through everything that is going to be necessary to fly to Alton Bay and to land and take off from an ice runway. We're going to be covering a lot of those here. And so one of the things that I do, and you may find it useful too, is when it comes to pre-flight planning, I like to use a checklist. I like to do it for a couple of reasons. First of all, that way I don't forget anything, but also it just reinforces the habit of using a checklist and adhering to a checklist. And I find that really helpful for me. So I'll jot down what I actually need to do for my pre-flight tasks, and then I'll go through and do them. And I also like to try visualizing, especially for something that I've either done rarely in the past or maybe I've never done before, bringing in all of the information and just taking the time to sit down quietly someplace and turn off the iPhone and the iPad and close that door and just sit in a chair and close my eyes and just start to think, what will it look like? What are my contingency plans? What if I'm on short final and I have to go around? What is the go around technique in my airplane? And see myself doing it, pushing in the power, pushing in the carburetor heat if I have carb heat on the airplane. You know, pitching for a climb, you know, retracting the gear, the flaps, whatever the situation is. But I imagine myself going through that. And so these type of techniques and this type of pre-flight planning can go a long way to making sure that you have a safe flight to Alton Bay. One of the things to keep in mind when we do talk about Alton Bay is right here on the slide, the limitations on pre-flight planning. This is an ice runway. It's covered with ice and snow. Things change quickly. It may be that conditions have changed and we haven't had the chance, or there hasn't been the chance to get those uploaded to the NOTAM system. And so we're going to talk a little bit about other places that you can go to pull down pre-flight information so that you can make this flight safely.
Yeah, and this year the pre-flight is going to be different too, because we are dealing with COVID. And I'll reach out to you, Carol, like you were talking about, is, you know, the airport here with the New Hampshire DOT has to follow the governor mandates that we're all dealing with. So an essential that we all basically have probably multiples of these in our pockets now are the masks, right? And I think also you're talking about this is probably more so on the busy weekends, wristbands for the pilots, and they're not going to look this nice, I assume.
No, sorry. We're the state. We can afford what we can afford.
Yeah, yeah, but what pilot and passengers will be given wristbands, and the general public is not going to be out on the ramp area. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's a new policy for us for this year. I know it's been tradition to allow the public, their pets, their children out into the ramp area to get up close and personal with the aircraft and the pilots. And it's a really great community awareness effort. But this year with COVID, to try to prevent those gatherings of people, we're going to be encouraging the members of the public to stay off the ramp. Members from our office at New Hampshire DOT will be there to help educate the public. We're starting a social media campaign to help let people know about that. So the pilots and their passengers that are coming in on the plane, as they leave the ramp area, we will be giving them a wristband, like what you might see at the races or something like that. Just wear it somewhere visible. It can be on a zipper pull. It can be around your wrist. You can have it in your hand, put it in your pocket. But if you don't have the wrist band, you're not going to be allowed back onto the ramp. And we're only going to be doing this on those busy weekends. So if you fly in on a Tuesday, the airport's probably not going to be attended. And there's going to be very little activity out there. Great day for you to come in if it's your first day, but we're not going to be dealing with the wristbands and the public at that point. But on the busy weekends, we want to try to keep the separation between the people as best we can to comply with the COVID guidelines. We're also going to be limiting the number of aircraft that can park in the ramp area. As you know, in the past years, we've tried to fit in as many aircraft that we can that want to come into Alton Bay. And I think, as we said, we were in the low 30s for the number of aircraft that we can fit on that ramp area because we tuck a low wing aircraft under a high wing aircraft. So there's some wing overlap in the parking area. This year, we will not be doing that. There will be no overlap, which is going to reduce the capacity, with the theory being that we will be reducing the gatherings of people. So be aware, if you're flying in, you may be in a holding pattern, or you may have to divert to your alternate airport if there isn't sufficient room to park, if that was your intention. You'll always be able to come on in and do your landings and takeoffs and utilize the taxiway, but you may not be able to find a parking spot in the ramp this year. And then on those unstaffed days, we will not be implementing the wristbands. The public may, in fact, be out on the ramp with you, but if history proves right, then those will be uncrowded days, and we're not going to be worrying about the COVID restrictions at that point.
Yeah, some of the pictures you've probably seen in here, most of them flying wise are from me. And years ago, I decided I'll go in on the weekdays versus the weekends in my flying. And you'll see there's rarely another aircraft there at the same time that I am on a weekday or something like that. But the weekends can get pretty busy. And, plans change. And that's one of the things about Alton Bay is it is a very, very dynamic airport. Paul and his crew have to do a whole lot of work, but just like any airport, this is similar. I don't think it's an exact copy, but this is similar to what you have on the books at the New Hampshire DOT for what the runway should look like. But weather plays a big factor in this, doesn't it, Carol?
It does. Every year, our intent is to try to get a minimum of 2,500 feet of runway length. Depends on ice thickness and the quality of the ice as to whether or not we can get that. Some years we get 2,700 feet-ish. So each year, check your NOTAMs so you'll know how long the runway is for that season. The alignment really does not change. We really don't have any options for rotating the runway.
That's true.
We do our best to share the bay area with the other winter users. It might be the snowmobilers, it could be the ice fishermen, it could be the snowshoers who are out there as well. So it's a very populated, popular area. So have your head on a swivel, be aware of your surroundings. It's going to be a busy place on weekends for you.
Yeah, and everybody always asks about, how much ice is enough? For Paul and his crew, the big issue is not necessarily the aircraft. It is more so enough ice thickness, the entire length, to be able to support the weight of the plow trucks and equipment that they need in order to create the runway, along with the heavier snowbanks that end up developing and all of that. So, at 12 inches, I would suspect Paul's probably like, okay, we're starting to look at it, but it tends on the southern end down near the parking area and approach end of runway 1 to be the thickest, thinner out near Sandy Point, which is near the approach end of runway 19. But I would, 12 inches is where they're probably starting to think about it, and it depends upon the condition of the ice. 14 plus is what they're really looking for. And, depending upon how cold the winter, it's been a while, but I've seen as much as 36 inches out there myself when I've been out ice fishing and that sort of thing. And it depends. Black ice, which doesn't have much air in it and is a lot of what has formed this year so far because we haven't had much snow and everything other than very early in the season, is by far much stronger than a white opaque ice that has a lot of snow mixed into it. And the challenging part for Paul, his crew, for the pilots taxiing, even for the planning for you, Carol, is down here in the parking area in the threshold.
That's right. For us, it's how do we get people in and out of the apron area? So if you're going to come in and land, and I think we're going to talk about this in a minute, 2 years ago, we instituted a new policy because of some accidents that we've been getting in a row over a couple of years of people landing on runway 19 and then skidding beyond the end of the runway, beyond the threshold of 1. Thank goodness they missed the parked aircraft. They missed the parked people while their propeller was spinning. They did severe damage to their own aircraft. And thank goodness the pilots were okay in the end. Bumps and bruises, but nothing major. But to try to avoid that situation going forward, we're only going to allow, when weather conditions permit, landings and takeoffs to the north. So landing and taking off on runway 1. And in a way that will help, because as you land on runway 1 and you want to get off the runway and come back to the parking ramp, you're going to come back on that taxiway. And then you're going to hold. Paul and his folks are going to be, we call it at the throat of the apron. So where the apron and the taxiway kind of come together. He'll be out there. He'll have wands. I think they're bright orange. They're very pretty. Wands that he'll be waving, and he'll also have the radio. So he'll be talking to the pilots both on the ground as well as up in the air as needed to try to get everybody through this bottleneck area. We don't have a lot of space in the bay to try to create a separate entrance and exit into the ramp area. So we are asking everybody, please be patient. Please be aware that we may ask you to hold at that taxiway for a little bit longer than you would hope, because we've got another aircraft that's coming in up over the ridge and they've got priority to land. We don't want you underneath them as they're approaching that threshold. If there should be an issue for any reason, they lose altitude, they're right into you, and we don't want that to happen. So pay attention to Paul and his folks, and they'll guide you through that process.
And the parking, this is what it typically would look like, and Carol had mentioned it before. Many times, you know, to fit as many aircraft, they'll go kind of low wing, high wing, low wing, high wing, and overlap that. And we're not necessarily looking at that this year. So there's going to be less opportunity. It's going to be more like you see these two Cessnas, you know, kind of put wingtip to wingtip, and that's going to be to meet some of the criteria. And here's probably a little bit better picture of the throat area for you, Carol.
Yeah, this is actually really good. This is from a couple of years ago, but you can see that as you're landing on runway 1, so heading to the north out into the big lake, you will overfly a portion of that ramp area. And that taxi lane, or the taxiway, as it passes just to the south of the threshold to the runway. So that's where our bottleneck really is. One of the things I do want to point out to you is that while we were definitely plowing to get access from the ramp out to the runway, we have noticed in the past some pilots who prefer to try to land in advance of the actual threshold, or even taking off in advance of the threshold. And we want to discourage that. There is an actual threshold. Steve, can you point out where the water bandstand is? At that point right there, about 100 feet north of that is where the actual beginning of the threshold is. That's where we want you to start your takeoff run, and where we want you to don't touch down before that point. There are a set of 3 cones. Paul often calls them the triple cones, that delineate where that threshold is. I think in the last Facebook page from yesterday post, he did a really nice video identifying them. Since we don't have any snow berms out there right now, they're really easy to see. So if you can become familiar with that, that's great. One of the problems that we've had is because this whole Bay Area is streaming with the public wandering around, we try to keep them off the airfield, outside the berm areas, but a lot of them like to be out at the water bandstand and take pictures, or their kids are running around in the snow area before the berm. And if something should go wrong and you're trying to land, excuse me, before those threshold markings, we don't want an innocent bystander to get hurt, and we certainly don't want you to get hurt, because sometimes, especially towards the end of the season, if we've got a lot of snow, that throat area going out to the runway can get narrower and narrower. So you're losing your wingtip clearance. So it'll always be nice and wide from the threshold going north.
Yeah. And, you know, we kind of, out of habit, I think, use the terminology displaced threshold. But really what that is if you were at a larger airport, the markings you would see on this runway would be this. It really is just a taxiway that is aligned with the runway to the point of the threshold. You know, you don't want to begin your takeoff roll or be landing before that threshold. You know, you shouldn't be applying the power until there. And like you mentioned, on the Boston FAASTeam YouTube channel, there is a short little 1-minute video of my son and I were flying in doing a final approach, and somebody right up there on the berm. I never did see him, but right after we touched down, my son said, "Did you see the guy taking pictures by the bandstand?" What? And we happened to catch it on video, so I leave it up and I slow the video down. It's only about 1 minute long, but you can kind of see an example of hazards are there if you're landing pretty close to the threshold with people that decide, you know, general public, oh, let me get a good shot, good picture of this airplane. Now, you were mentioning the big thing is runway 19, not going to be available in the way that it was before. Carol, you want to talk about that a little bit? Right. And I'll move it on to the next slide as you do too.
Certainly. So runway 19 obviously favors winds when they're coming out of the south or a southerly direction. However, because we have had a handful of accidents over the last several years, 4 or 5 years, that have, during landing on runway 19, run long. They've gone beyond the threshold, gone beyond the water bandstand and into the parking areas, or they run into the berm at the end of runway 1. And they've had problems, to say the least. You can see here they're trying to flip an aircraft back over. One nosed in where the water was, or the ice was very thin and ran into water. So it's a bad thing all over. So what we're going to do is Paul and his folks, they monitor the winds. So whether they're primarily watching the windsock and the weather forecast, as the windsock no longer favors runway 1, or the crosswind component for runway 1, just it's too strong. You know, that windsock is out straight coming from the west or the east. We're actually going to get the aircraft that are on the apron out of there. We're going to let them know ahead of time that we're anticipating the winds to switch around and we may not be open for the whole afternoon, for instance. So please pay attention to the weather, and we will try to get you out as best we can, but we're not going to allow new aircraft to come on in. And as soon as the last aircraft has left, we are going to close that airport until the weather or the winds switch around and favor runway 1 again. We just want to try to avoid these types of accidents. We've been very, very lucky, knock on wood. It's funny how what do you want to call it?
I'm knocking on wood.
Knocking on wood, yes. Just we'll knock on wood.
Yeah.
It's interesting that statistically we should have had some really, really bad accidents, but so far we've been so very lucky, and we want to make sure that we stay very lucky and we never have a fatality. We don't have a bystander get hit. We don't want any of that. So we're just erring on the side of caution, and we want everybody to be aware of that. We will have a NOTAM once Flight Service Station Lidos allows us to reactivate the runway NOTAM, because NOTAMs, as you know, for regular land-based airports, once you get ice, especially glare ice, out on the runway, normally you close the airport. And because we're just the opposite, Lidos actually makes our airport inactive in the NOTAM system until we open it. So once we can open the runway, that's when the NOTAMs will be out there reminding people that runway 1 will be the only runway for landings and takeoffs when the winds allow for it. Otherwise, we will be shutting down that airport.
Yeah. And, it is interesting. I've flown in and out of here 30 plus years now. For those of us that know it, when we first discussed this a couple of years ago, Carol, my heart sank. But all of us, Paul, the New Hampshire DOT, even, people within the FAA like myself, are hoping, looking for alternate solutions to this. We are hoping that it is a temporary thing for some reason, some way. And this is a good example. This is a picture from a couple years ago, a weekday, like I was mentioning, I was flying in and out of there, and I think my son snapped this picture, but this shows as you're climbing out off of runway 19, how it's kind of aligned with the parking area, the larger snow berms that you can be there. And this is the thing to think about. If you had to do an aborted takeoff, where are you going? If you have an overrun on landing, where are you going? If you had an engine failure on the initial climb, like at this point right here, where are you going? And that's why, it's a definitive hazard. It's a risk mitigation in order to improve the safety from what we have seen with it. And then taxiway, again, Carol, you're pretty good at this because you know what the plan is. You know all the work that Paul does and everybody else to, make this airport happen.
That's right. So the taxiway, there is a parallel taxiway that we try to create every year using the snow berms to delineate them in years that we don't get much snow. Sometimes you may see them delineated with traffic cones. So please be aware that we don't want you back taxiing on the runway. We want you off the runway and onto the taxiway. When you come southerly on the taxiway, heading towards the apron area, I'm sure you'll be on the radio, assuming you have a radio, letting Paul and his folks know whether your intent is to get right back onto the runway or if you need a parking space. They'll let you know if there's sufficient parking space. If not, they'll direct you back out onto the runway so that you can do your takeoff. If you need to get in, if there's space in the apron and you can get on in there, Paul will direct you when to get off the taxiway because he's watching the airspace as well, and also watching those who want to get out of their parking space and out onto the runway and through that congested area. So he's doing, it's more of an art, a dance, to try to keep the aircraft all moving to the places where they want to be. So be aware for Paul and his team to help give you that guidance that you need so that we don't create an accident there while on the ground or on the ice.
Yeah.
One of the other things that we don't want you doing is run-ups out on the taxiway. There's a space. Steve, can you point to the apron area? Yes, thank you. That's generally where the run-ups are being done. If you need more space or just want to get out of the stream, that's a good place for you to tuck in out of and be ready, and just let Paul know when you're done with your run-up that you're ready to head out onto the runway.
Yeah, and you also have to consider too, the conditions change. There's times where at the airport you can do the run up just like you would at a normal airport. There's other times where you kind of have to do a run up almost as if you were in a seaplane, at doing the best that you possibly can given all the circumstances, maybe doing it at a reduced power just because you have an inability to keep from sliding and all of that. That's one of those things that it's very dynamic, and I use the terminology which you can find out more like in the seaplane flying handbook or whatever, but what I would say is a seaplane run up you may have to do occasionally. And it is a different airport, so it's always challenging. You have to go for that all available information by means other than you may at any other airport. The Facebook page, which we'll show the cover of here in a second, is probably one of the best places, one of the two best places to find the information on it. You know, you want to look at the chart supplement, formerly called the Airport Facilities Directory. Older pilots like me, that's what we think of still in our mind when we write it down. You know, the airport identifier is Bravo 18. The NOTAMs, as Carol mentioned, they're different because, you know, when everybody else is shutting down an airport, Paul and his crew are opening up an airport. So you know, it throws flight service for a loop every year with it. It also is, just to get an overview, if you're ever in the area, you know, visit ahead of time or fly over. And then there's also the recorded phone number on the conditions, which is an absolute must anytime that you're going. You know, if you're on Facebook, this is where Paul puts his updates, usually every couple days or so. On it, you know, and terrific information is available there. But this is one of the principal phone numbers, if not the principal phone number, is Paul does a recording on this that updates on ice conditions. You know, it's at least every couple days, more is warranted. I know there's been times where I've been thinking about going and Paul's updated it 2 or 3 times in a single day. With it. This is available in the chart supplement along with another phone number that is a direct line to Paul, but this is the one where you want to get you know, the information on the airport. And, you know, I recommend this. You're here at the webinar, which is good, but take a look on the web. You know, a lot of positive things, but also a lot of risky things that you can see with it. And what I really do is try to look at the differences. You know, a lot of people have posted things of flying in and out of there. You know, note the conditions and the differences and think about what you would be doing with different wind and all of that when you're looking at these pictures or videos, because our whole point here is we want it to be a life-changing event for you, you know, something that you can be proud of for all the right reasons with it. You know, and as we've talked about, the NOTAM system is a little bit different. It doesn't fit in there, you know, it's a little bit, it varies a little bit. And the chart supplement, Carol, I think as time is coming up, we're looking at some updates to that about the Runway 19. Is that correct?
That's right. Because of the 56-day publication cycle, I'm not sure when it'll actually hit, but we have uploaded that information into it.
Yeah. And, you know, this is one little thing that can help you out. It's not precise, but the color of the windsock, you know, outside of the airport, what I would call, for lack of a better way, being activated, doesn't necessarily mean that it's open, but that Paul and his crew are right on the cusp or have gotten things set out there for the runway to be activated, is the change of the windsock on the bandstand, or the color of the windsock will change. Is, you know, in the summertime and when the airport is basically not ready to be open, is it'll be a white windsock. At the time it is either is open or you know, Paul and his crew have things set out for it to be, you know, ready to open on a moment's notice. He'll change the windsock over to the orange one. And we were talking about this in the pre-briefing, is he did that just this week. You know, Tuesday when I drove by, it was the white windsock. This morning, it's the orange one. So all of this brings us to a decision-making question for you. And I got another poll question here for you. Is winds are forecast to be 230 at 10 knots and you're planning to fly into the Alton Bay ice runway. And John, I'm going to ask for your help again.
You bet. You bet. I'm here. I'm still here. Okay, here are your answers. Sounds perfect. Let's go. Runway 19 is great on a nice Saturday. Nice day, maybe fly up and sightsee and land elsewhere. And pack it up, not flying today. And I can land at Alton Bay with a tailwind. I'll give it a shot. So please go ahead and vote. Also, for Steve and Carol, we've got some questions that, you know, coming in. I just thought I'd field them out there because they're repeat questions, so people are interested. They're asking about the communication frequency at Alton Bay, both in the air and on the ground. And I think that's a good one. And let me see, there was another one in here too that I will get to, but just something to be thinking about.
Oh, I'll take that one. I believe it's 122.8 for the frequency in the air and on the ground. That's
Yes.
what Paul and his folks will be monitoring.
Yes.
Okay, and oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Steve.
Oh, and just recognize on a nice Saturday in the winter, it can be a very busy frequency, especially if you're up at a little bit higher altitude.
And another one was, what type of ground markings would you have to designate that the runway or Alton Bay was closed? You know, depending on, you know, what the winds are or the weather is or the conditions are, would there be any ground markings?
That's a great question. Paul and his folks and our office at New Hampshire DOT, we've talked a lot about this. Unfortunately, right now, the only mechanism we have is, well, we have two mechanisms. One, we have the NOTAMs. Second, as pilots are coming in and Paul is monitoring the radio during these days, he can get right on the radio and say, I'm sorry, but we're closed. Please pick your alternate airport. We've talked about, you know, putting chalk or can't do paint. We talked about snow fence. We don't have the energy resource to put up a lighted X on the runway. Some of those things. And the partially part of the reason is because these things will either freeze into the ground or come springtime when everything melts, we're going to be polluting the water. And while like chalk doesn't seem like it's going to be a pollutant, the environmental folks are not happy with us adding anything like that to the water source. So we're open to options. If anybody has a suggestion, let them fly. Let us know.
Yeah. I have one for you, Carol, but we can talk later.
Okay.
Because at an airport that I'm at, it's what we've been talking about. So terrific. Hey, why don't we go ahead and share this poll now?
Well, it looks like most of you voted for a nice day, maybe fly up and sightsee and land elsewhere. That was 72%. The next most popular was back it up, not flying today at 22%. And then option one, which was sound perfect, let's go, runway 919 is great on a nice day, was only 4%. And I can land at Alton Bay with a tailwind, I'll give it a shot, it was only 3%.
Yeah. And, you know, in the past, maybe going up runway 19, but as we're talking about, that's not going to be available to you this time of year or this year. And we're looking for mitigations on that. And I would not, which we'll get into, encourage anyone to land at Alton Bay with a tailwind. Is you might get away with it, but it doesn't mean you're always going to get away with it. You know, aircraft performance and all of that. And especially with the example here, you're talking about a 7 or 8 knot tailwind component probably in the example that we had here. I actually, you know, most people did choose it, but I would encourage you to actually, if it's a nice day, you know, in the middle of winter, get out there and fly and sightsee some. Is aircraft need to be exercised. And that's something that doesn't happen. Is the more an aircraft sits, the more likely it is to break. Actually, the more likely the engine and stuff won't last as long. So I really would encourage you, if it's nice enough, get out there and fly, you know, maybe change your plans a little bit. Whether you're flying in there yourself, you got to be a craftsman. And also for the people that operate the airport, you know, they're craftsmen. It's not like, you know, going to an airport in the Chicago area and plowing it or something like that. This is an ice runway. It takes a lot of technical science and skill, knowledge about the ice, how it forms, how it changes, how it is in that very specific area to get repeatable results to be able to create that runway. And it involves that art, you know, all that experience, that skill, adjusting. And, you know, the ground crew that creates the runway for you, you know, they're craftsmen, they truly are. And you as a pilot, you have to be a craftsman to operate in and out of Alton Bay. And that's one of the things that we want to point out. You know, going in, it does help to talk, but do recognize there are some aircraft that are Nordo aircraft, don't have any radios at all. Also, you know, Paul does the best and his crew as much as they can to help manage things, but not necessarily everybody that'll be on the receiving end of the radio are pilots or familiar with it. Or along the other way, we've all seen this, all of us here on the FAAST team, not necessarily the pilots that are talking on the radio are familiar with talking on the radio. You know, they may not have, they may be in a new aircraft and not been using a radio for 5 or 6 years, and then all of a sudden going in there. Or, you know, the place they only fly all the time is Beverly, Lawrence, Bedford, and they're so used to talking to a control tower that they're a little lost in a common traffic advisory frequency airport. So you want to do that. And, you know, it does depend. I love this picture, you know, somebody coming in a Cub and they're ready for anything with it. But, you know, there are people that do that, you know, have the moving map, the timer, you know, GPS, everything in their portable. But most Cubs that you'll see, or Champs, that sort of thing, are going in there with, at best, just a handheld radio. And you got to think about your insurance going in there too. All I want to do is emphasize, take a look. If you're planning on going, you know, talk to your insurance agent, because you might think you were covered for an aircraft like this, nice and polished, pristine, but that all you're really being covered for if something were to happen is this. So I have to put that out there. We're also always asked by a lot of people, do I need a ski plane to fly in there? No, you don't. But ski airplanes do fly in there. Many times, actually, believe it or not, it's a little bit more challenging for them because of the ice and directional control and that sort of thing. In fact, I know there have been circumstances with ski planes that they land just on the east side of the runway where it's snow versus actually on the ice runway itself. But you will probably see some ski planes there. But, you know, you don't need skis to go in there. You do want to be very, very aware of your aircraft performance, though. And that's actually where our last poll question to get you thinking about that is aircraft performance. And I'm going to launch that one.
Okay, and I'm back on board. Okay, aircraft performance and data is readily available in my approved flight manual. My AFM is not available in the AFM. It's highly variable and can only, I'm not sure, Steve, what the end of that would be because it's not showing. But the third answer is all in my head. Fourth answer, I saw an A36 there, so I could do it in mine. And the fifth answer is changes significantly with weight and braking coefficient.
Yeah, I cannot see it either. It dropped off. Probably hit the limit for Citrix on that particular one. Guesstimated. That's what it is. So I'll share back to.
And for the answers, most of you like the fifth answer, which is aircraft performance and data changes significantly with weight and braking coefficient. The second most popular answer was is readily available in my AFM. And then we had low single numbers in 0% for ICERN A36 there, so I could do it in mine.
Yeah, and you know, you do have takeoff and performance data available in your AFM, but you don't have it for Alton Bay, period. You know, there's so much difference on the ice runway. Maybe even it doesn't go down to as cold the temperatures you might be dealing with or whatever. You know, the takeoff performance is usually probably pretty close to what you'll end up seeing on a paved runway, but the landing performance is completely different. You know, you got to think about it. You're not landing on pavement or even on grass. You are landing on one of the slickest surfaces that we know that is available out there. So, you know, you really got to think about that, is recognize that the performance you're accustomed to is not what you're going to see at Alton Bay. In fact, I basically say, think about what you normally use on a landing and double that. That's what it's probably going to be like at Alton Bay for you. You know, so a few things that we have with it, you know, talking to other people that fly in and out of there, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, but, you know, where do you start to get an understanding of what your performance data is going to be? one of the things that I've recommended to people that are looking at going here is go to a flat airport, because ice will have a little bit of undulation to it, but it doesn't have, 5-foot changes in elevation along the runway, as some runways do. But go to another airport and do some landings and don't touch the brakes at all, all the way to a complete stop. Just use the aerodynamic braking. And then because of the ice, probably plan on adding at least 50% to that. And, that's a general recommendation that you'll see from AOPA and others. Recognize the big effects that wind have on you. A 10-knot headwind in this type of landing practice is going to make a huge difference. The other thing to recognize is the directional control aspect. Is you got to think about that. Is as much as possible, Paul and his crew will do their best with, chains on tires and driving over it and how they plow, and they even will try to leave a little bit of a crusty layer of snow and ice on it to give you as much traction as possible. But it's not always that way. Is you got to think about it. How comfortable are you with a skidding car? Is a tricycle gear aircraft may behave for you a little bit more like a tailwheel. I've landed on ice on airports and off airports on like frozen lakes and stuff, and I've had circumstances where, because of the crosswind, as you're getting down to 10 knots, the aircraft completely weather vanes and finishes its last 100 feet of its landing roll going sideways. Not very likely to happen at Alton Bay because of what Paul and his crew do, but it's something you got to plan on or think about and be prepared for. Also, torque effect, or what we normally call the left turning tendencies, are way more pronounced, usually on the ice. That nose will swing more to the left on, U.S. aircraft than it probably has in the past on you with it. And whatever your personal minimums are for a crosswind, half that, for going into Alton Bay at least. And, I myself personally, at about 10-knot crosswind at Alton Bay is where I'm like, done, way too much. Get out there, make sure you're really good. You have to be the ace of the base on the soft field takeoffs and landings, a crosswind takeoffs and landings. Also, it's tucked down in a valley. Recognize rough air and wind shear, and we'll talk about that. And also be aware of flat light conditions, because it's ice, shaken, not stirred. You got P factor, cast ring nose wheels, ice is slippery, snowbanks are not soft, all of that. And, you have to, whether you're at Alton Bay, larger airport, or somewhere else, do your due diligence and research on the, and if you're flying where there's been recent snow or ice, you probably want to not only be checking the NOTAMs, but calling the FBO and that sort of thing. And I just mentioned it here quickly. If you're going into larger airports, a few years ago with the FAA, we started using what's known as the Runway Condition Assessment Matrix. And here's the criteria. It's one of the handouts that is available to you, but the runway is divided basically into thirds, and a number is used corresponding back to these conditions for it. And it's used actually usually in higher performance Part 25 aircraft on landing calculations, takeoff calculations, aborted takeoff calculations. And 6 is basically like an ideal runway, dry, no problem whatsoever, where number 1 is down ice and poor braking action, that sort of thing. Is your home airport in the middle of winter probably would look something like a runway condition of 644, but Alton Bay almost always is 111. And about the best you're ever going to see Alton Bay probably is at a 3 level. In relation to this. And if you're looking at NOTAMs, this is what it would end up taking a look like. Is for field conditions, runway is 336, 25% compacted snow, so forth and so on. So I want to highlight that to you. and realize, and Alton Bay has all sorts of differences. It will vary, you know. It'll be anything like this where it's just sheer glaze ice, like you see in this picture of this 182. You know, you can also have it, and this is probably more so what Paul and his group try to achieve, where they've tried to leave some crust on it, uh, you know, some snow to give some tires some grip in relation to it. So it's going to be anywhere in between those. And even we've had this happen, you know, it might have multiple, um, you know, few inches of snow on top of it. We've had people over the years, I know, that come in and land before Paul and his crew has even had a chance to get out there and plow it. And, you know, pilots were probably known for having egos, and this is not the place to have your pilot ego get in the way. You know, you hear about those hazardous attitudes and being macho. As Alton Bay is not the place. You know, is the first time you go, don't go it alone. You know, there's a few nearby flight schools that will work, and the instructors there have experience and can take you and do training. Other pilots that have flown in and out of there, fly in with them. There's pilot groups, you know, flying clubs around the area, I know, that will do fly-in type of events themselves. You know, there's nothing official at Alton Bay, but, you know, where 3 or 4 airplanes, say from, you know, a flying community will fly into Alton Bay one morning. And that's the opportunity to go, is take the opportunity to go with somebody else who has experience there and learn from them first. You know, it's not a training airport. It's kind of good to give you awareness of some of the things, but you really got to stay at your home airport first. Work on your crosswind, no brake landings, precision spot landings, making sure you can put it right where you want it. You know, work on your go-arounds, and also the psychology to this. You know, it's, we have talked to pilots, and, you know, one, with events that have happened, one, the ego has gotten in the way, or two, they've also expressed that maybe they had errors because of anxiety associated with landing there for the first time. And, you know, because it is an airport that is publicly open in the wintertime, you don't see this as much, but I use this picture to highlight to you, because we have people that think, oh, I'm going to start going to land on other places that are ice covered and all of that. And it may not be a good idea for your insurance, maybe more so with the local community, maybe not with the FAA, because things can pop up. And even occasionally, we've had over the years things like this pop up, usually for a short duration, because the airport operator, like Paul and his crew. But, you know, you take a look at this picture. One is the flat light. You know, if you're going in on a gray day like this, there's flat light that makes it very challenging to see things that are out there. And we've had this happen where a ridge of ice breaks up and pops up along the runway. Again, Paul and his crew are looking for that, and because of the condition, it's very rare, but this happens more off of unprepared surfaces on ice, frozen lakes, that sort of stuff, and really do some damage to your aircraft. But you see, that's almost impossible to see. And even larger things, you know, get left out there or whatever. If you take a look at this picture, you'd see there's a couple large blocks of ice left out there in the middle from nowhere. Flying in the area, just this time of year, you do have to recognize that you can have some snow squalls. It might be perfectly beautiful south down near Boston, but you go up near the hills of New Hampshire and you have the mountain wave rising, lowering air, and you have snow squalls develop, and you've got to be aware of that. You know, after a snowfall, you got to call and check for conditions, because if you're not familiar, but a lot of snow makes it very heavy and wet, and it ends up sinking down the ice, and it ends up creating a lot of slush underneath. And this is something that Paul and his crew have to think about. They may actually wait a day or two to plow after a heavy snowfall, just to, if it's going to be exceptionally cold. It all depends upon what's going on, or they may have to wait to make sure they get as large of a crew as possible so they can clear it up as quickly as possible before it all freezes. And you can have these type of circumstances. Is it might look perfectly good to you from up in the air, but if you didn't check NOTAMs and all of that, you could be landing on what is really just a big pile of slush. And, also recognize snowbanks are not soft. They freeze solid after. And even like today, it's raining out here right now. Not that we had the airport open, but if we get the warm weather like this and we get the rain, it can just turn into, an almost ideal skating rink, which is not what we want to have for a runway available to us. So just to give you a little idea, here's a short little video on Alton Bay overview.
This is what it may look like flying off of the ice runway at Alton Bay. The runway is aligned in this approximate direction. This would be runway 1. As we go by the bandstand and head down the runway, in the northern end of the runway is near this spigot of land off on the left, Sandy Point. You can see as you're initially climbing out, there is some rising terrain directly ahead of you. So many people actually veer slightly to the left or the west in order to avoid the rising terrain. If you were to have an engine failure or similar emergency on initial climb out, usually your best option is on the ice out on Alton Bay. The snowmobiles may have packed it down, but just be aware there are some large ice ridges that usually form, and it could also be fairly deep snow. As you turn crosswind or are on a 45-degree leg departure to the northwest, you can see the Belknap Mountains and Mount Major off in front of us. This is where you start to get some rotor turbulence, especially if the winds are out of the northwest or the west. This usually is the bumpiest part of the traffic pattern. And again, getting away from the bay, there is some larger rising terrain. Close to the bay, it's mostly small hills, not quite the mountains of the Belknap, but it is there. Turning on the downwind leg, you'll see some of the largest terrain in the small hills, with Pine Hill being almost on the center of your downwind leg pattern. It will vary on how you may approach this. I tend to stay right over Pine Hill or just inside of it on a close-in leg, just so I can see the runway. If you fly your downwind leg to the west of Pine Hill, you're going to find very few options available for you, and you're probably going to have your view of the runway blocked. Right now we are passing Pine Hill, and it is about due east or just directly off the left-hand side. Heading south, the terrain starts to fall away in the area where you would do your base leg. And as we do turn our base leg, you'll start to see the town of Alton. Some recognizable aspects of it are the small Wentworth Pond near the firehouse, and also the elementary school, which is near the area, along with the Alton traffic circle. Here, Alton and the surrounding areas are starting to come into sight. The Alton traffic circle is now starting to come up towards the center of the screen. town itself. And the airport would be basically directly due north of us off our left-hand side. As we turn around, here comes the baseball field of the elementary school, the firehouse, the small bridge just south of Wentworth Pond, and the large road cutting across the center of the screen is Route 11 heading up to Wolfboro, New Hampshire. Alton Bay is coming into sight, and you can start to see the rest of it. Do be aware that on your final approach, you're probably going to be right down over the river valley, heading directly at the airport. Pay attention to the bandstand, as the threshold is just beyond it.
All right. So that gives you an overview. It is available. It's not publicly available in terms of you can go and search on it, but this is a terrific place to take a screenshot or write this down quickly if you want. You can watch this on your own as long as you do have the link. It is on YouTube at this link here, and give you a little bit of an idea. It was made with Google Earth, so most of the imagery is from May versus the middle of winter. But you get an idea. And here's a few pictures just to kind of give you a little bit more what it may look like with it. This is actually over on the southeast corner of it to give you a broad overview of it. But the runway located right in this area here, I think this was a year that it was not open yet when we took this picture. This is right down in the village, the neck, the parking area would be here, the bandstand, the runway. This is Sandy Point. This is rest of Alton Bay, rest of Lake Winnipesaukee. This long island here with the knob to it is Rattlesnake Island. And then the Belknap Mountains, which are pretty low mountains, are over in this area, with Gunstock Ski Area being right over the top. And then the White Mountains are up to the due north here. And this is Route 11, as I was mentioning, that kind of parallels the first portion of the bay going up from Alton to Wolfboro, New Hampshire. This is looking down on it. It's I do actually think this is a picture from John and I a few years ago, where the afternoon that we took this picture was the day that Paul and his crew started plowing. It was marked out here in this picture, but they started plowing it. And this is what it looks like a little bit better. This is similar to looking at like the beginning of the downwind for runway 1 with it when you are flying there. So being prepared, you want to be aware, as mentioned, is there are Nordo aircraft a lot of times in the area. The ramp may be full. Also, if it just doesn't feel right, there's nothing wrong with coming to the area and going. You want to be prepared for windy conditions. It's not unusual to have 10 knots of wind down south and then have it be 15 with a gusty crosswind and all of that, and how slick it may be. It might be beautiful and 45 degrees down your way, or even 20 degrees, but you get up north here, it might be a bit different, and the conditions may be a bit different. Basically, it's okay to go around to make sure you got it right. It may even be that you do an approach in, get down kind of low, but if you're not feeling it, doing the go around, getting set up better for a second time. You can always keep calm and go around. Once you're on the ground, this is important. And I've ended up seeing this before. Like, I know a few years ago, I was there and a family flew up in a Bonanza, which was almost fully loaded, which surprised me to begin with. But then they get out and we had like 8 to 10 inches of snow everywhere. And everybody's just wearing sneakers and don't have hat and gloves and just like light running jackets and that sort of stuff. They had flown like 250 miles to come experience this, which was excellent and awesome, but they weren't prepared, and they asked me to take a picture of them and the family by the airplane, all of that. And all they were doing the whole time was trying to hold each other up because it was so slick on the ramp. And, the younger kids are sitting there, lips blue, shivering. You have to be prepared. So bring stuff for you and for your airplane. It's not this dramatic, but for a lot of people that go to Alton Bay, they're not familiar with, operating in the snowy conditions. There's no tie downs. You got to bring like your own chocks, that sort of stuff. Bring an engine blanket. There's probably not a way to do any preheating on your aircraft engine. If there is, it's probably only because some other pilot has brought it there. If you don't have a specific cover for your aircraft, you can use like some old moving blankets, or like I've done, you buy a bunch of moving blankets from Harbor Freight and just have the clips that can work out. You just have to be careful of the material that you're using. That can work in a pinch. The preheater I was mentioning, definitely bring a tow bar, especially for those with like castering nose wheels and that sort of stuff. Bring your portable tow bar if you do have it. You got to be prepared. This is one of my great safety reps who comes in there quite often, shows up and being prepared, for his aircraft, for him and everything. He packs up the little backpack to make sure he's got his warm gloves and hats in it and everything like that. And, also recognize, I got to give the caution with COVID for this year, but out on the ramp, many hands make for little work. There may or may not be people there to help you on the ramp. On a Saturday there may be, but it's pretty packed and all of that. You have to be the commander of your aircraft, direct people where they can push, where they can't push, help others, all of those different things. The ramp, we mentioned a little bit about the stacked alternating. It's going to be less parking for this year. Paul has some people in the local area that love to come out and help. I've been out there a few times myself. If I'm by the area, I'll stop just for a little bit and help push an airplane around or something. But normally what it is we'll push the airplane down into the spot. Paul and his crew, they'll pull it out to the middle of the ramp. You got to watch the tail with the snow berms and all of that. And even if you want to put it in a spot by yourself, at least listen to what the folks on the ramp are telling you, because they have the experience and know best. Be aware there can be other aircraft, ski planes we mentioned, occasionally helicopters. This has even happened before. And actually we were talking the day that arrow went off the end of the runway. I was up flying in Vermont, and I and a few people talked about flying over there. And I happened to be listening on 22.8 and then heard about the aircraft mishap and was like, yeah, we're not going today. But there's all sorts of things that can happen there. And, who even knows now that the PC-24 is certified for ice runways? Not that we would ever expect it, not that services are available, not that I would want to be the one ever deciding to take that type of aircraft to an ice runway. You never know what you're going to find there. And, the other thing is help with the public. This is a great thing that Paul and his crew do. And Carol, you mentioned this, I wasn't even thinking, but the picture of many people are like, who is Paul? Well, there's Paul right there, directing traffic at the airport. So if you don't see his face on Facebook, you at least know what he looks like a little bit, and, thank him for all the help that he does. But also take the opportunity to help keep the public safe with what's going around. Not everybody recognizes the dangers of propellers and all of that. It is a unique airport. It has the old school openness, and we ask to advocate for the airport. If we don't use it, we're going to lose it, and it's a great thing. Rarely, this goes with Paul, his crew, and others, but rarely is it ever an issue. It has been in many years past, but this is exceptionally rare now. But do be aware that there's all sorts of other vehicles on the ice around the runway. So once you're out of the parking area, keep your eyes and ears open after you walk around. Take advantage of some of the things that are there and available. I don't know Paul or somebody else that's local. I actually haven't stopped, but it looks like the corner store, which has been open and closed a couple times over the years, looks like it may be open again as a sandwich shop. I'm not sure if it is now, but there's a few different restaurants in the area. I would say do that with appropriate social distancing. I almost always, this year I didn't, but every year before this webinar, I've always gone and had breakfast at the Old Bay Diner the morning of this webinar just to get out and see it, since I live in the local area. It may be new to some people, but a lot of ice fishing going on. There is an annual winter carnival, which again is slated for the 24th of February, and this is always by far the busiest day. It's the day everybody wants to fly in. The ramp gets packed. Not everybody can make it and stuff, but this is going to be exceptionally subdued this year with COVID. The town of Alton is changing what they're doing with it to help with social distancing. So just do be aware of that. You got to be aware of your surroundings. Yes.
Sorry, I just want to correct. I think what you had said was February 24th. Right now it is slated for February 14th. That's a Sunday.
Oh, did I say 24 by accident? Or maybe that was just the slip of not having the teeth. Who knows?
All good.
Who
just want to
knows?
make sure everybody understands.
Yep. Yeah.
And right now, a lot of the winter carnival activities are not going to be down on the ice, but that may change. They're still working on their program.
Yeah. It's a brave new world this year again, folks. That's the big thing. I mean, I know I'm really looking for it. I'm not flying like I normally do in the winter this year. I'm disappointed. I even think if the airport is open, I myself personally am probably, I don't see an opportunity for me to be flying into it. I'll wave as I drive by and stuff, but I am looking forward to the future. But in the area, you got to be aware of your surroundings. Pets, you want them on a leash, that sort of thing. There is some open water on both sides with bubblers that are trying to keep the ice from forming around on the docks. The ice can get thin rapidly near that edge. You just have to be aware of your surroundings. As I mentioned, people take their pets out. They're all not the best behaved. Some of them match in, like my dog does here, unless you have something to show where it is, what it is. I have a white furred dog, so it matches in well with the snow. You mentioned this, Carol. I took this picture for that reason. Everybody getting right up to the edge of the runway to take pictures. We don't have much for services there. Paul does the best that he possibly can, but it's a temporary airport on ice in the middle of winter. So, there's no gas, no tie downs. You might have help to push your airplane on a weekend, probably yes. On a weekday, likely no. There's no maintenance. There's no overnight. Things you might have in your hangar, are not going to be readily available there. And I know, Carol, your office with this does a lot of work with New Hampshire Fish and Game. They're out there a lot, doing what they do with the ice fishermen and controlling the traffic and all of that other stuff, and rescues in the snow and so forth and so on. But, in a really, really good year, no matter what, the airport is planned to close at the end of March, March 31st. Why? Because around here, April Fool's is not an April Fool's. Everything has to be off the ice by the 1st of April. Otherwise, you face significant fines. And, this gives you an idea of if you get trapped out there with your aircraft near the end of the season and it starts to melt, what it could end up looking like, and that's just not a good thing for anybody involved. When it is getting warmer, they may end up closing the airport. Remember, you're the PIC, things can change rapidly. This is a picture from a few years ago from someone, I think, from fairly far away that caught the water on a warm spring day or warm winter day because the ice had started melting. It was really slick, caught the water on the edge of the runway, hit the snowbank and flipped over. And that safety rep I showed you the picture of before, that same day, he flew up there in the morning, texted me, hey, you want to come over and meet me for breakfast? And before I even had a chance to answer, he said, scratch that. I'm departing because I'm looking at what the forecast is, and I'm here on the runway now, and it's starting to melt. I got to get out of here. So, you got to be well aware of the conditions. And as we get to the end of the season, most of us in New England are really looking for maple syrup more than we are looking for, fun in the snow. And some of the lessons learned with it.
Just accepting the overall risk level is up for everybody. And earlier, Steve was talking about, paying attention to your intuition, spidey sense, really. If your spidey sense is tingling, and of course, if it's tingling really aggressively, why is it tingling? And acting on that, when it first starts to tingle is definitely to your benefit. And of course, regardless of your own measure of competency, you are exposed to the actions of others that may impact your planning. Something to be thinking about is contingency planning, and along those lines is what happens if you land at the airport and you develop mechanical difficulties with the aircraft? What happens if you slip getting out of the airplane and crack your head in the ice, you have concussion, and you can't fly an airplane for a month? What's going to happen to that airplane? So be thinking about those type of contingency plans. And therefore, elevate your attention in your detail in planning for your flight and pre-flight. And it's exactly right, packing everything you need for an overnight stay, if that's what it takes, clothing, footwear. Where can you get maintenance help? The closest airport is Laconia with Emerson Aviation, and that might be your best bet. Packing extra tools, broken wheel pans, prone to catching slush and ice, that's a possibility. And having backup plans for staying away from home if you did slip and fall and get hurt, if the airplane did get stranded there because of a mechanical problem. What are you going to do about getting back home? What about pet care? What are your contingency plans? If you have these things covered, it kind of removes the pressure of making a return flight against your better judgment. So for whatever reason, you get on the ground at Alton Bay and time comes for you to depart, and whatever series of events is against you, the wind has kicked up, the weather's coming in, the ice is getting soft and slushy, the standing water on the runway. If you're feeling pressured to get that airplane out of there, you may be making decisions that go against what your spidey sense is telling you. And again, remembering to access all the tools that we have talked about here for assessing the conditions and arrival and departure, and that includes NOTAMs, PIREPs, weather briefing, speaking to airport management and other pilots, calling that phone number that we listed earlier, the Facebook page, visiting the Facebook page, and and paying attention to crosswinds. Steve and I do accident analysis. All of us do. All of the whole FAASTeam group that's here, we do the accident and incident analysis for our FSDOs every year. And our number one causal factor is loss of control. And we can split that right down the middle, loss of control ground and loss of control flight. They're about 50-50, 60-40 every single year when it comes to loss of control accidents. The ones in the ground are usually crosswind. So anyway, this is a runway that's not bordered by grass. It's bordered by plowed snow and ice left and right. And you know what it's like toward the end of the season. The snow in your driveway becomes an ice ridge. It can get that way at Alton Bay too. So be thinking about that. Sliding off of the runway in a crosswind carries some pretty serious consequences. Check your insurance coverage. There may be exclusions for landing on ice, and the time to find that out isn't after you're sitting there with some damage to the airplane. And you can always change your mind. You can always go someplace else. Departing an ice runway, you have the option of walking alongside the runway, not down the middle of it, to look for slush and standing water. It doesn't mean that just because it's a runway, it's suitable for use of your aircraft that day. And 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 just remember to bring the right footwear to do that, so you don't hurt yourself, you don't slip, fall, and get hurt during that inspection. And Steve, you want to pick it back up here?
Yeah, yeah. And one thing to think about is, you know, going to snow-covered, ice-covered runways. Alton Bay qualifies there, but this is really any of them. Be aware that you might have some impacts as you return home. Is you can have changes on one, say your flaps and ability to move them. If slush was kicked up and it froze, like you see here on the underside of it, or maybe it's kicked back onto the elevator. I know a few people that have said, geez, you know, the elevator didn't feel quite as well, and you find the whole underside of it is covered with like slush that had been kicked up like that. Or if you get slush that freezes solid in your brake caliper area and on your wheel, you know, you'd have a pleasant ride home, you know, at 0 degrees Fahrenheit up at altitude, and it just freezes solid. An hour and a half later, you go land on your nice paved runway back home, and that wheel doesn't move at all. And, you know, you can have large turning movement with it, that sort of thing, but you also can end up with a nice big flat spot on your tire. You know, and why are we doing this? Is we're here at the end, you know, is it has hazards, it has risks. We want you to be, excuse me, as safe as possible, but we want you to come visit the airport, have fun, and depart with a positive lifetime memory. That's what this airport is there. It's for you, the pilots, to develop that, you know, to have that terrific opportunity available to you, you know, and I wonder, you know, Paul and his crew, each year they're getting better and better at it. You know, maybe they're looking off in the future at making some ice runways in other parts of the world for some bigger airplanes. Who knows with that? Well, I do want to thank you. You know, as we finish up here, the thing is document your training, FAASAFETY.GOV. If you're not in the Wings program, you know, please at least do something proficiency wise, flight review, club checkout, whatever it may be, once a year. If you don't do anything like that, try the Wings program that we have available. You create an account, complete your profile, attend a seminar, take the Wings flight, and you've checked the box on it. If you want to take a screenshot, here's some videos that can help you along that way. And from what I understand, we're continuing to do this. We have been doing it. It's from some people down in the Bradley area, but do this nationwide, is the Wings sweepstakes. There's prizes of $10,000.